So far, we have been talking about the different formats of quadratics and what can we find from that quadratic equation. What information can I get from it? You guys have to always ask yourself the question of what format is it in? Is it in standard form? Is it in factored form? Or is it in vertex form? Because each format can show you or can tell you different information. So here's an example. The profit of a chocolate bar can be modeled by the equation P equals negative 0.3 n minus 7 squared plus 10.8, where P is the profit, thousands of dollars, and N is the number of chocolates sold in thousands. Now, I want to ask you the question. If you look at the equation, P equals negative 0.3 n minus 7 squared plus 10.8, what form is it in? Standard, vertex, factored. Vertex, right? Remember, you need to be able to identify the three different forms, where you have this is your standard form. You have this as your vertex form, and you have this as your factored form. Let's look at different things right now. What can I find from the standard form? What can I find from the standard form? No, standard form. Okay, let's look at the vertex form. What can I find from the vertex form? It's called the vertex form. What can you find from it? The vertex, right? So you can find the vertex, right? What can you find from this, from the factored form? Right? What can I find from the standard form? What does this represent? The y-intercept. Okay? So each form gives me different information. Okay? Now, the first question is, what is the coordinate of the vertex, and explain what it represents. What's the coordinate of the vertex? Can I find the vertex from this? What form did we say it's in? It's in vertex form, so I can find the vertex, right? What is the vertex? Seven what? It's a point. Vertex is a point. 10.8. Okay? If I want to look at this, what is the x-axis? What letter is representing the x-axis? N. So that's the number of chocolate, right? And what's representing the y-axis? What letter? P, which is the profit, right? So N is replacing the x, P is replacing the y. So if you're looking at your vertex, this is N or P, the 7. Seven is N or P. What's replacing x? What's N? And 10.8 is P. Yes? Guys, vertex, x, y. Instead of x, I have number of chocolate. Instead of y, I have the profit. Okay? You have to put 2 and 2 together. Life is not always x and y. Okay? Now, the vertex says when you sell how many chocolate bars? Where's the vertex? How many chocolate bars am I selling? 7,000, right? Because it's in thousand. So, when 7,000 chocolate bar is or are sold, what happens? What's your profit? What's the profit? What number represents P in the vertex? 10.8. So 10.8 thousand is actually 10,800, yes? Yes? So when 7,000 chocolate bars are sold, the maximum profit is $10,800. Vertex represents your maximum or minimum point. You guys agree with that? Good. Now I know that this is going to open down because that's a negative value. So I know I'm going to have something that looks like this. And I know that my vertex is going to be at 7,000. And then my maximum height is going to be 10.8. Now I have to say that in a sentence. This is when you have to put things together, guys. Now, the second question is, what is the y-intercept? And explain what it represents. What form does it have to be in order for me to be able to find the y-intercept? Standard form. That's right. So there's 2 ways to solve for this. I can put my vertex into standard by expanding. That's one way. The second way is to plug in. When you're looking at the y-intercept, when you're looking for the y-intercept, what's the value of x? 0. Plug in 0 for x, solve for y. So there's 2 ways that you can do that. Okay? I'm going to write both ways on the board. Okay? So the first way is to actually standard form by expanding. I don't know if you guys remember from our first lesson, to expand, I'm going to have to write n minus 7 twice because I want to do the FOIL. Yes? Now I FOIL. After I FOIL, I have to distribute that negative 0.3 into the bracket. So I distribute the negative 0.3 in. I multiply the negative 0.3 by each term. And now I collect like terms. Now, by looking at this form, can you tell me what the y-intercept is? Which number or letter or term represents your C in that standard form? Negative 3.9. So that means your y-intercept, which is your initial profit, is negative $3,900. What does it mean when I have a profit of negative $3,900? I'm losing $3,900, which makes sense. If I have zero sale and I'm producing, I'm going to lose, right? Because the y-intercept, again, remember, the y-intercept is when my number of sale is 0, right? I'm selling 0 amount of chocolate. Now let's see if that works the same way if I plug in 0 into my original equation for n and see if I get the same answer. So I'm going to plug in 0 for n. Negative 7 squared, that's 49. (49) times negative 0.3, that's negative 14.7. And that is negative 3.9. Is that the same answer that I got earlier when I just did the standard form and I took the C value? Is that yes? Yes. Right? So I have two choices here. I either put it in standard form and find my y-intercept by stating that C is my y-intercept, or I can plug in 0 for x, or for whatever represents x, and find my y-intercept. Okay? Now, what does it represent? That represents, again, I'm going to say the word again, and you need to catch up on these words. It says the initial profit. What does it mean when I say the initial? What does the word initial mean? What you started with, right? So you're starting with a loss of $3,900. That's when you sell 0 product, you haven't sold anything. This is what you're starting with, okay? So we're going to say that the initial profit is a loss of $3,900. Now here's a scenario for you guys. You went to a store and you bought chocolate bars because you want to sell them. Okay? You want to sell these chocolate bars. Do you have to pay for these chocolate bars when you go to the store and buy them? Right? So you're going to have to take with you, let's say, $200 and buy $200 worth of chocolate. So you come and you put your stand to sell your chocolate. Now you are in debt $200, right? Because what you're starting with a debt of $200. Every chocolate bar you sell, your revenue starts going up and your loss starts going down, right? Because now you're making the money back. Until you get to a point and you break even, right? So you spent $200, you got $200 back. Does that make sense? Now, after you make your money back, what's going to happen to your profit? It's going to go above zero. Now you start making money. Does that make sense? All right. Now, the question is, or the next question is, what are the zeros? The zeros mean the x-intercept, yeah? What form does it have to be in order to be able for me to find the x-intercept? Or the zeros? Factored form. I have the vertex form. I have the standard form. Now, how can I find the factored form? What process do I have to follow? Number one, in order for me to go to the factored form, I have to go from the standard to the factored. Okay? From the standard to the factored, and I have to factor. That's the action that I'm doing. I have to factor. What are the different factoring techniques that we learned? What's the first question you ask yourself when you factor? Do I have a common factor? In this case, you see that negative 0.3 in front of your x squared or your n squared? You want to factor this out. So that means you're going to have to divide each term by negative 0.3. Okay? So to factor this out, I'm going to have to divide each term by negative 0.3. Now let's see, if I divide 4.2 by negative 0.3, I get a whole number. And I need to get whole numbers, otherwise I can't factor. If I divide 4.2 divided by negative 0.3, I'm going to get negative 14n. And if I divide 3.9 by 0.3, I'm going to get 13. And that's a positive because negative over negative is positive. So I asked myself, do I have a common factor? It turned out that I do, and I removed the common factor. Perfect. Now what do I ask myself? What's the next question I have to ask myself? What are your leftovers? You know, whatever is inside the bracket, that's your leftover. Is it a binomial or a trinomial? Tri. Good. With trinomial, how can I factor it? What process do I have to follow? Huh? FOIL will take you back to this. You can't FOIL. So I learned difference of squares, and I learned sum and product. With a trinomial, what do? I have to do sum and product. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to my last term, and I add to the middle term. So two numbers that multiply to 13 and add to negative 14. I only have negative 13 and negative 1. So my factor is y equals to negative 0.3 n minus 13 n minus 1. And the question is asking me what is your x-intercept, or what are your zeros. My zeros are 13 and 1, which means I'm making zero profit. I'm making zero money. If you look back here, your x-intercept is when your profit is 0. So that means my break-even, or we call it the break-even point. So the break-even point is, or are $13,000 and $1,000. Chocolate bar. So that means if I sell 13,000 chocolate bar, I'll make no money. If I sell 1,000 chocolate bar, I make $0 as well. To understand the problem, to be able to solve the problem, I just basically spend 23 minutes demonstrating to you what do I do to solve a problem. I have to ask myself questions. If you guys don't ask yourself the questions to be able to answer these questions, you can't solve a word problem. You see that I have drawn a sketch. Even if the sketch is not correct, draw something, just so you can visualize it, so you can see it. Understand what the words mean. When the question is asking you for example, the initial point, you need to understand that you're looking for the y-intercept. You need to understand what form you need to put it in. So I know here that if I have the initial point, if I'm looking for the initial point, I'm looking for the y-intercept, and I have to put it in standard form. If I'm looking for the break-even points, break-even means what? We just did that. Break-even, what did I find for the break-even? My zeros, right? So I have to find the zeros or the x-intercept, right? And what form does it have to be in? Factor. If I'm looking for the maximum, minimum profit or distance or height, what am I looking for? The vertex, but which part of the vertex specifically? The y value of the vertex, which we call the optimal value, okay? So that's the optimal value which is the y value of the vertex. And what form does it have to be in? Vertex form, guys, vertex form. Anytime you're talking vertex, anytime you guys hear the word vertex, you want it in vertex form. Now, in this case, it says the point at which the maximum or minimum occur. So again, maximum or minimum. So that means I'm looking at the vertex. Maximum, minimum means your vertex. So again, in this case, I'm looking for the actual vertex point, which is HK, and I need it in vertex form.